One, two, three.
My original name, I think we will yeah. You need to do that. Probably much time.
I see you.
You know, the view is quite
Oh, they did call it.
Well, I still have a small petition here.
So an important name in the paper tonight. Today.
Yeah.
Right up front.
Yeah, that was me.
Yeah,
But not just me.
well, you probably see pictures too nowadays of in the world where the lights are on at night. North America and even places like Holland, it's only about solid because it's very compact.
Yeah.
But France, there's a lot of places except for Paris and Bordeaux. Black. And well, but the other thing is, we were in France 10 years ago, and we were in a village staying with some friends, and it was dark at night. And we went to the room, and at 12 o'clock or 11 o'clock at night, I saw the village was completely black.
That's nice.
Yeah, it makes sense because
Well, makes
there's
sense.
so few traffic anyhow, and if you want to be on the road or be a car, you've got lights on it anyhow, you're on a bicycle. Because when I grew up in Europe, we never had any street lights. So, you know,
Well, it wastes so much energy.
oh, I know. But even the university right now, all those buildings, are all lighted up. And this building, the next one, the last one.
Believe me, some of our light pollution people were talking to the university about trying to get this toned down a bit, but they weren't interested.
I mean, for the break, they have a spring break now.
All the time.
All the time. Yeah.
So let's just continue. I have no idea.
Alrighty, shall we begin?
My talk is here.
Mhm.
Now, I did bring my computer. Would it be better if I use that one or if I popped it on yours?
It's mine if I. It's got a full battery, so. Should be
Okay.
okay, yeah.
All right, so we'll do that.
Okay, yeah, it's fine by me. Alrighty, so that's, see any new faces tonight? Oh, bummer. I'm kind of hoping that the low turnout is maybe because we're on. What? What, online?
Yes.
Sure. So this is actually our very first internet broadcast general meeting. I forgot my pin. So yeah, we're actually live on the internet right now somewhere. So anyways, just burn through all the dull stuff because we have a bit of a change of speaker tonight. We did have, at the last minute, we've kind of switched for Chris Gaynor. He's going to talk about the Hubble Space Telescope, which is like very cool. So let's burn through the dull stuff. In the Sky News, it's just my usual white noise. Bruce.
Okay, here's my dull stuff. You want me up there, or do you want me to?
Oh, there's fine.
Okay. Our members account currently stands at $12,105. Our giving account at a mere 90 weeks, more flush money to come in from the raffle tickets that's selling. So, and we're still, as I mentioned before, every meeting, still looking for ways to spend money. So within a RASC context, so if you got some ideas that will benefit the club, please bring them up. Rascals of Cattle Point is going to be running this month again, February 27th, weather depending. Last month, hopefully we can do that again. That's pretty much it. Just running down some general reports, finishing off the year-end stuff. That's all for finance.
Good, thanks, Bruce. Joy, anything to report?
The general meeting minutes from last month are posted, or should be posted by now, and that's all I have.
Okay, good. Chris?
Members of site right now, and 17 members are in the grace period, so membership has actually expired.
I did mine yesterday. Good, thanks. I don't know why I have the star party up there because there's nothing new, except it was on the 23rd to plead our case for waiving the fee for the field, which I guess we have to do every year. And we now have both guest speakers lined up for the star party. One will be Chris on the Friday night and Dr. Phil Stuck talking about Mars on the Saturday night. So we're covered for guest speakers. So that's the star party. I don't see Sid.
Sid's away.
Sid's away?
Yeah, he's not available.
Oh. All right. And Joe's not available. Joe's on holiday as well. Matt stuff.
I normally give you some stats about the website and so on, so let's go into the 1,300 viewers of the website in the last 30 days rolling. We had 250 YouTube views, and the whole smattering, something around 500 in the Zenfolio as well. Still looking for someone to do a media role, a media liaison. Basically, they would be monitoring an email address as well as filling out form letter press releases and make it as easy as possible for the person to do. Those press releases would then get sent to an automatic email address that then bombards everyone, so that they're actually aware of what we do. Particular of note would be the GAO evenings. Nothing really to report up the VCO. We have a number of being planned in terms of maintenance and so doing some insulation in the roof this year for the summer. We have a grant application going out to CIRA, EA website domains. They have a whole pot of cash last year. They gave out $1 million to 29 different recipients. So out of 104 applicants, I think we could have a pretty strong case there to use the internet to better people's lives. That's the meeting.
Just one question about where, it's been several emails. And webcast after it's done. Have you figured that out yet?
We will figure that out at the recording result, and I will make an announcement on Skype's list about it.
Thanks. We've had a couple emails from members of Ireland, one in China, who just can't be here. And due to the time difference that our member in China couldn't view live right now, so we'd like to know when. So, our good friend Natasha would like to get some more images for her Twitter feed. The images that you might want to offer up to put on the Twitter page. So she sent me that little snippet of an email there. If you're not sure what constitutes a nice image for International Year of Light, just shoot her a quick email. Look, she'd be happy to put that up there for you. Lori.
I've got a couple of things that I've got on my list of things to do here. First of all, from the national, we're going to be having our main meeting in March, and I'm going to be. I did get on the list. Chris, I did call, and I'm now on the list. Yay! So that's good. And I think Chris and Paul can talk a little bit about it, but we will be having a 3 new directors this year for coming up into the 2015-2016 year. And so looking for some people, so if you have someone that you or that you think from our center that would be good to have as one of the directors of the national organization, that would be great. And of course, Paul Schumacher, you're sitting right here, has been a director for how many years, Paul, now? Is it 3?
2.
2 years, and you will not be
No,
going on. We'd love to replace Paul with someone from this, from certainly our geographic area. It would be great to have somebody from out here, besides Chris, of course.
Sure.
Good. So that's that. So the other thing that I need to, sends his apologies. He's not able to be here tonight. But he was really very pleased and wanted to say thank you to everybody who was at the hobby show. There was, I don't have his exact numbers of people, but we had over, I think it was like people that were visited us over the 3 and that there were over 400 hours of volunteer in 3 days, something like that. I put the number and did all the work there. Like it was an incredible number of hours that people did to work to get that done. So that was just excellent. So and he just thanks everybody. He just was just like how everybody. So he says thank you very much to that. So he's got a couple of other things. All of the tickets, all of the ticket booklets for the lottery for the lovely telescope, the 8-inch telescope that we are raffling off. All of those were sold, and we have I have $1,000 to give to Bruce.
Wow.
Today, just 3 days worth of selling tickets. Sherry, you still have a book of tickets for the 10.
I have a book of each.
You have a book of each, and Malcolm, you've got the 5. Nelson has still got a booklet of 10. You've got a book of each, because all of the other, because all of the 3 for 10s have gone. So if you're looking for tickets at 3 for, you need Chris or Sherry. The other tickets that will be left are the 1 for $5 ones that are. So we're doing really well. So thanks to everybody that's already done that. And of course, if you want to see Sherry or Chris, you can get some tickets from them. Then the only other thing is I have two calendars that are further going. I'm going to sell them off. I'll even kind of start to kind of auction at this point. I mean, this is now like $10 a piece. And don't yell at me if you had to pay a little bit more because it's now February. You didn't get the chance of having them in January and February. But if anybody would like them, then please come and let me know. I would even do negotiations, right, Bruce?
Yeah, if you buy 6 lottery tickets for this.
Yeah, we'll give me one of these.
You get one for
free.
free.
There you go. We will negotiate. Right? So I do have 2 here for people who, if there's any extras, so we can do that. I think that is it. We're just about ready to prepare to put in the letter to the NRC for the summer Saturdays, and hopefully that will, just cross fingers that everything will go all right. Okay. All right. I think that's all. Is that anything else that I'm supposed to talk about? Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Lori. Any other new business? Anything to bring up? I only have one point, and unfortunately this Friday is our next scheduled night on the telescope upstairs. And since John has the only key, and John's on vacation, we'll have to cancel it, unfortunately. But hopefully we'll pick it up again next month when John is back. There's some reluctance to have more than one key floating around. Has it, so I can't get one, and John has it, and we'll try again next month.
Anything going on at the basket?
No, I kind of wore out my welcome asking and asking and asking and asking time and time again and kept being turned down. So I kind of stopped asking because, I mean, I can be a really big pain in the butt, but I don't really want to be that big a pain in the butt. So just too much other work going on and not enough time for us. All right, so let's call on Chris Gaynor. Do you want to introduce him? Yes.
One of the things that struck me about the Victoria Centre way back when I first took up my membership here and began to get to know some of the people was just how much talent and ability the members had. I mean, it wasn't like we needed necessarily to go out to find people that were serious observers or incredible astrophotographers. I mean, I started to see the emergence of all within the group, and I have been hoping that we would hear more from some of those internal talents as time went on. Now, we did hear from Dan in December, I believe that was, and then last month from John and Reg, and tonight, and I'm not going to drag this out as a long introduction because most of you know them over the years yourselves. Tonight we hear from Dr. Chris Gaynor. Chris, who, as some of you may remember, was actually president of the center here at one point, and has been spending the last 2 years, well, not away so much at National, but working on our behalf at National, and now is on the board. With that said, he's going to present tonight on a topic that he is, I may have said something about it, about him becoming increasingly the expert. That's because it's one of his latest projects and will be the topic of his next book. So, without anything more, I'm sure Chris would love to tell you about it. Chris?
Take a moment here to deal with our technical issues. I should have run down before before Sherry started, but we were having such a good time.
And look under this DC. Over on the left-hand side. Yeah, spin that. Remove the focus.
You can just use the arrow keys here, just scroll if you want.
Great. Should I just bring up?
It might be better because I don't use PowerPoint.
No, there was one about 9/11. One of the things that happened on 9/11 is that it meant that Bill Gates is no longer the most hated man in America. I was kind of hesitating to use this computer because it's getting rather aged. Oh, and I have to get the adapter, I think. I'm supposed to be getting a new. I might have even got it today, but it got held up at customs. You know, working project, so. And this thing is becoming a bigger pain in the neck, because, you know.
How long is that?
3 years now.
Lori has finished that, I want to get off there as fast as I can. I find I have my online time is so packed. I don't want to be any more details on that desk. As much as I work. It's a nice desk, very clean. So I just want to- but it's, you know, actually, so I have to work, but yeah, I don't. If this is a grab, I don't want.
The hamsters are running as fast.
Okay.
And now the hamsters are running PowerPoint as fast as they can.
Just tell people what you're doing tomorrow and the next day.
Yes, this is a 3-day marathon of RASC meetings for me. Tomorrow I'm going to the Vancouver Center meeting. And then on Friday I'm going to the Sunshine Coast. But I'll only be sort of talking about stuff. I'm not the featured speaker like I am tonight. Although I actually did the same trip last year, and in February as well, and I think I was the featured speaker at Sunshine Coast that time. So. All right, so we're off. We're off to the races. So I'm going to be talking about the historical project I'm now working on with the Hubble telescope. I've been working on it for about 3 months now. I was actually thinking that I wouldn't be giving talks about it, maybe until later in the year, but anyway, here I am, and what the heck happened there?
Like the thing at the top is this swap displays, please.
Where?
At the top.
I have a different view on this thing.
Yeah, it's got your screens, but thanks to your actual laptop monitors. PowerPoint trying to be helpful. It's not very helpful.
This webcast is brought to you by the Microsoft Corporation.
Don't say that, Google or sponsors.
So to tell you the truth, say a year ago, I would never have expected to be giving this particular talk. And I've been working on other things, and although I personally am not particularly military oriented, that's kind of where things have been taking me. I started out, as you know, by writing and talking about the Avro Arrow and how people from the Arrow got involved in NASA's early space programs like Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo, and then I stayed in this field, thinking about the unthinkable, I guess. when I was doing my dissertation in history at the University of Alberta, working on the Atlas intercontinental ballistic missile. And then a couple of years ago, I was teaching at the Royal Military College. They offered some courses there until my close personal friend Stephen Harper, he needed more money for commercials for non-existent programs. So that job disappeared, and the last couple of years I've been looking around for work. But I guess you could say that okay, I'm sort of a little distracted here because I'm just not sure what this computer's going to do. No? Okay. Do you know what I'm supposed to hit here? Okay. Okay. Yeah, I just want to see. All along, I've been spending a lot of time and energy and money thinking about the Hubble telescope along with other things. And I think a lot of it, this is kind of typical of a lot of us. There's a couple of, I think there's probably but as astronomers, we're interested in what it, and it's actually strongly influenced a lot of the things we do as amateur astronomers. So when I got this job, I went rooting through my basement looking for Hubble junk, and then I took a picture of it. Press and videos and posters and stamps, all sorts of Hubble junk. And I also went looking through my old photographs and found this photo from about 6 years ago when I visited the National Air and Space Museum in Washington, D.C. And I'm standing next to the test article for Hubble. This was used fit equipment and test it in various simulators, and then they sort of dolled it up to look like Hubble. So an idea of how big Hubble actually is compared to a real person. When I saw that picture upon taking this job, it also gave me a good feeling of how big the job was compared to me, of writing the history of Hubble. So I like that picture. And as I'm going to show you a little later, I paid another visit to that location. So I did have some preparation to write the history of Hubble. Now, another thing that went on was the last decade or so, I've been involved in studies. The picture of me at the left is with Dr. Stephen Johnson, who is perhaps my most important professor at the University of North Dakota, where I took a degree in space studies, a master's degree. And after I did that degree, I did my PhD at the University of Alberta with Dr. Robert Smith, who's in the picture next to me. Dr. Smith wrote the only existing scholarly history of Hubble, but his book ends in 1990 when Hubble is launched. unless you got the second edition, which has a little afterword about the some of the mirror difficulties. So of course, a lot about Hubble, but again, I didn't think I was going to be maybe picking up his particular torch there. But what happened is that last spring, and it was actually around the time of Astronomy Day, the Goddard Space Flight Center decided to put out a request for proposals for a history of Hubble to follow up on Dr. Smith's book, to start when Hubble blasts off on April 24th, 1990. And I looked at this proposal. They not only wanted a history book, they wanted some articles, and they wanted an archive with so that future historians could have something to go to. The people I interviewed, they would be able to get those interviews, and the documents I find, they would be able to access, so that in the future they could write something that's hopefully better than what I come up with, or at least fits those times in the future. And we'll talk a little bit about that. And I looked at this and I thought, well, this is too much for little old me. Even though there were some people from up on the hill who were urging me to apply for this. Another person who had taken this master's degree in North Dakota, but didn't have a PhD, wanted to get involved in this in the worst way. So he contacted Dr. Johnson there and said, do you know anybody who's might be interested in doing it? Johnson knew that I was at loose ends. So he, and we'll talk about him in a minute, and we put together a bid. And last fall, NASA awarded us the contract to write over the next 3 years the operational history of the Hubble Space Telescope. So that's kind of how it all came together. There was a number of reasons. I did find out subsequently that there was some pretty stiff competition, and NASA did like some of the features of our bid around the archive. And the fact of my relationship with Dr. Smith was also very helpful. So the fellow I was talking about is a guy named John Ruley, and he's the fellow at the left. And we are also involved with a small little firm called Foresight Science and Technology. It's a small consulting firm, actually based out of Boston, but Arent Spesser in the center there is also helping us out on this. And John and Arent will be working mainly on the archive, but I'm sure John will also be doing some of the interviews and helping me out with. So we actually just we never met before we did the bid together. We just met when we all went down to Seattle for the AAS in January. So, but I've already gotten to know John pretty well. But it takes a team to do something. So that's what we've got. So what we've been asked to do is to come up with a formal scholarly history. But it is my hope that this history will be accessible to people who really know a great deal about Hubble. And I've written 4 books so far, and number 5 is kind of in the hopper. Have all been aimed at popular audiences, but it does have to meet scholarly standards, and it will pick up from Dr. Smith's book, as I mentioned. And then I've also mentioned the other features there. Dr. Smith's book is quite useful for people who are working on the Space Telescope today and may not know the background. The issues that come up is Hubble is kind of run from two places. It was built by NASA. It was actually built by two NASA centers: the Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville, Alabama, which of course is famous for build Hubble. And then once Hubble was launched, they basically withdrew from the operational part. But a lot of the operations is still Space Flight Center, which is just outside of Washington, D.C. That's not a very, to the general public, the Goddard is not that well known, but it's certainly well known in the world of science because most scientific satellite programs are run out of Goddard. But at the time the Space Telescope was being developed in the 1970s and the 1980s, there was a certain amount of mistrust, I guess, and bad feeling had developed between the scientific community and NASA over a feeling that NASA was perhaps too dominated by engineers. I think you can understand how that might happen because NASA was doing things for the first time. Landing on the moon, for example, in Apollo, they were very focused on getting to the moon and getting back because going to the moon was not done for scientific reasons. It was done for reasons of national prestige. And once they achieved the goal, then they were able to bring the scientists in. And there was anyway, there was a number of tensions in that period, and so the Space Telescope Science Institute in Baltimore, Maryland, was formed, and so it directs the scientific work of the Hubble telescope in cooperation with the folks at Goddard. And when I've been talking to people, who actually say, well, it's great to have Dr. Smith's book around, because we sometimes wonder why things are the way they are the relationship between the Institute and NASA. And we can look at this book and see this is how it happened and why it happened. So these books are kind of useful. Dr. Smith's book also talks about the various problems that cropped up when Hubble was being developed. It had a couple of near-death experiences. When it was first being developed, not only astronomers in the United States were on board. It was much more popular amongst astronomers in the eastern United States who didn't have the wonderments that the astronomers out west. So that was something that had to be overcome. And Dr. Smith is known as kind of one of the big thinkers on what's known as big science. And of course, one of the symbols of big science is the Hubble Space Telescope, involving large groups of scientists and many agencies and and lots of money and lots of academic and other energy. So, I've got to think about some ideas for my book, and I've still sort of barely started on the research. So it'll be interesting to compare what I'm telling you today with what I come up within 3 years. Of course, Hubble has made all sorts of discoveries, but even if Hubble conked out tomorrow morning and I still had my 3 years to write the book, the process of discovery from the data that we've got from Hubble will continue. And it could be that the most important legacy of Hubble we don't really know about yet. There are some very important ones, but we'll have to see. So I do have to talk about what we found from Hubble, but I don't plan to go overboard on it because that is still very much a work in progress. And frankly, most people I've talked to, or pretty well everybody I've talked to, hope that Hubble is still going strong in 3 years. The hope is for Hubble to continue for at least another 5 years. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. Throughout, in April, we're going to be celebrating 25 years of Hubble on orbit. In fact, the last thing I came here was I responded to an invitation to a celebration of those 25 years, which I'm going to be attending because there'll be lots of people I want to talk to at these events. So it's been 25 years, but Hubble, the Hubble today is quite different from what was launched 25 years ago. The instruments on board have all been changed out, in some cases 2 or 3 times. Famous shuttle servicing missions. And so it has instruments, some of which have only been there for about a little over 5 years, nearly 5 or 6 years now. So at this time, it's probably going stronger than ever. But one of the things I have to deal with is how the decisions are made to put what instruments on after Hubble was launched. Hubble has been a telescope that's been in evolution throughout those 25 years. As I mentioned, there's a perils of Pauline quality to Hubble. It was nearly killed by Congress a couple of times before it was launched. There were events like the Challenger disaster, and actually, paradoxically, the Challenger disaster turned out to be one of the positive effects from that was on Hubble, because I had a couple of people come up to me and say, you know, if we'd have launched that thing in 1986, it wouldn't have worked. They would have lost the solar panels, and the software wasn't really ready. So there was issues like that. But once it was launched, of course, I think most people in this room still remember that the primary mirror in Hubble was misshapen. And that's an interesting story. And that caused some serious problems, not only for Hubble, but for NASA. And that's a very interesting story. Actually, I think contrary to public belief, a lot of the work that Hubble was doing was not that seriously impeded by this mirror problem. I think a lot of the spectroscopy and all that just continued merrily along, wasn't affected that much. But the pretty pictures from Hubble were affected, and this of course is an interesting story. You know, that a lot of the work done by astronomers is not pretty pictures, but pretty pictures is what the public thinks Hubble does and what they expect from Hubble. And that has to be managed. When they had this this problem of spherical aberration in Hubble's mirror, Goddard and the Institute had to figure out a way of dealing with it. And ultimately, they came up with an instrument called CoStar, which was installed in Hubble, basically corrective lenses. And this was a success. And Hubble was saved, and so was NASA. Then we go ahead a number of years to about 10 years ago. And Hubble was originally projected to last about 15 years. That was, if you look, I still have some tapes of when it was launched that I found in my basement. They said, Hubble will fly for 15 years. Well, we were sort of out to those 15 years, and then we had the Columbia disaster. And the NASA at that time decided to cancel the one remaining, or cancel the next servicing mission for Hubble, which, and given the fact that the shuttle program was going to end, this was going to be the last servicing mission for Hubble. And this, at that time, was experiencing some difficulties, and there was a huge negative public response by the administrator of NASA, and so that basically meant that the administrator who made that decision left his job, and his successor overturned the decision. Hubble again, and and as I mentioned today, it's going better than ever. And these events really shook NASA, as I mentioned in the slide. But I think the ultimate story, I think if I had to sum up my this story in one sentence, it's the last point in this slide. Hubble has changed the way astronomy is done. Not only by the folks up on the hill, the professionals, it changes how we rank amateurs. I'll talk a little bit about the first point. It's because of the way data from Hubble are. When an investigator puts in their proposal to get time on Hubble, and it's approved, and Hubble gets the data, that investigator has the control of that data for 1 year. And after that, it becomes public domain. Anybody can use it. Anybody up on the hill, even people down here, and amateurs do things. This is a far cry from the old days when people would make proposals, say for 2 nights up in the plastic, and they wouldn't tell anybody about it. This sometimes happened, and they would work on their own. And, I've heard people tell tales of that sort of stuff. So that fact alone has revolutionized astronomy, because all this data, and then we can get into issues like the high public profile that Hubble has given astronomy, and various other things. But I'll get into that perhaps in a later lecture. And interesting part of this is that Hubble is kind of a unique facility, because it's a satellite. It's a robot. It's a bucket of bolts, but it's kind of become lovable, and it's got its own persona. And of course, there's lots of tweets and various other things in various media. Although there is kind of a limit to that. I noticed a story that came up this week was Hubble was proposed for a new Lego kit, and Lego actually said no to the Hubble, even though it's its anniversary, because they chose to put out some kits like for Daleks from Doctor Who, so it's still up this fictitious things. But Hubble is interesting, because it's one of the things that's interesting about Hubble is that it has been sort of dependent on these the repairs from the shuttle. So even though there are people who have gone to Hubble and have actually, other than astronomers, gained fame from Hubble, like the first servicing mission. Everybody got to know Story Musgrave, and from some of the servicing missions, other astronauts have come up. But the fact that Hubble has been serviced by these crews all over the years, and of course originally launched in one of these shuttle missions, adds to the interest. And of course, I might add, it adds a great deal to the cost. Now, one thing that's about Hubble that's kind of interested me is where it fits in to the history of astrophotography. Now, as Ollie, this is a very strong photographic, I guess, center. And I am not known as one of the great astrophotographers here. But I'm certainly I'm certainly interested in watching the process. I'm old enough, like a lot of people here, to remember when, say, a respectable topic for one of these meetings would be hyper in your film, and that is all gone now. It's gone the way of buggy whips and other things like that. We've now turned to digital photography, and so I'm interested in looking at Hubble's role in the transformation of astrophotography from the old-fashioned chemical film to photography. When Hubble was being developed in the 1970s, it was when the first charged coupled devices were coming up. But at the time, they chose that means of taking photos on Hubble. It was still kind of a courageous decision. By the time Hubble was launched, though, the transformation in the world of professional astronomy was well along. But it was still a few years before it hit us amateurs. But Hubble, I think, helped influence that because of the images it produced. And the people who were processing these images were dealing with much higher resolution than had been, and of course, a greater range of wavelengths than had ever been seen before. And they had some decisions to make. How do we process these images? Like, what do we show? What do we not show? What range of wavelengths do we put into it? How do we mix the colors? How do we crop the pictures? You know, we look at a lot of these pictures, but we all know from looking through the eyepiece that the pictures we come up with are different from what we see in the telescope, and they're different from what we would see, say, if we flew over to the Eagle Nebula Starship Enterprise. It wouldn't look exactly like it does. So how do you represent these things? And I've just been reading this wonderful book by an art historian called Elizabeth Kessler, who talks about a lot of the issues. And I haven't done that many interviews yet, but when I was at the AAS, I spent some time with a guy named Zolt Levay, who does a lot of the processing for Hubble pictures, and this is going to be something I'm really interested in. The one thing I've written about Hubble before this thing came along was an article I wrote in the Journal of the RASC a few years ago. A number of years ago, when us folks were led into the plastic, I went up there and took a couple of pictures. Of course, they were the three black and whites through the different color filters. But as I said, I'm not a photography people, so I took those pictures and then they sat around my computer for a few years. And then finally, I went over to John McDonald's place, and in an hour he processed the pair of them. And that got me thinking about, well, how did we decide to process them and what colors did they come out with? And I wrote a little thing about some of these images from Hubble. So anyway, this is a fascinating book. I'm going to be using obviously some of her work in mine. I'm going to be I actually have to go after her for some of the interviews she did for this book, probably in the next few days. I just think this is a really interesting subject, because the folks at the Space Telescope Science Institute have basically helped decide how we see the universe, how we visualize the universe, and I think that brings up a whole pile of interesting issues. By the way, there's a couple of other books. People love Hubble pictures, and the National Geographic Society has done very good business. Every 4 or 5 years, they crank out the latest images. And my friend Dr. Smith, one of my pals too, David Dvorkin at the Air and Space Museum, write some little essays to go with it, and then they sell amazing numbers of copies of these books. But Dr. Kessler wrote a chapter in the book that came out about 3 or 4 years ago. So it is elsewhere other than this book in shorter form. But I do, if you're interested in that topic, I highly recommend that book. And I just, I bring that up because this is something that I'm thinking about a lot when I'm writing my book. Has us looking at the universe. So I'm going to talk about some of the work I've done the last couple of months. Shortly after I got the contract, I went down to Goddard to meet the people who originated it. And so I went to Goddard, and this picture is taken in the control center at Goddard. There's yours truly, and then the fellow next to me in the back is a guy named Ted Gull, who's a well-known ultraviolet astronomer, who's actually retiring fairly soon, but I think he really helped get the ball rolling on this. And then in front of Ted is Ken Carpenter, and then in the back behind Ken is Jennifer Wiseman, who I believe is the Goddard project scientist for Hubble, and she's kind of an interesting person. I haven't talked to her about some of. She thinks a lot about sort of squaring her work as an astronomer with her religious faith, and there's some of that on the internet, which is quite interesting. And then in front of her is Patty Boyd, who's another astrophysicist at Goddard, and then at the right is a guy named Jim Jelitic, who is who's actually an engineer, and he's the assistant manager at Goddard. And so he's one of the guys who just make sure all the trains run on time in terms of if you can talk of trains and Hubble. So I've got some great tours of the Hubble facilities at Goddard, including the simulators they have for Hubble. And some of the technology in Hubble is pretty old-fashioned, like 70s, 80s. And so I went down and looked at these things, and there's some monitors and circuit boards and things like that that my entire eyes haven't seen for decades. But when they want to make a change in the software or hardware in Hubble, they have to test it in these simulators to make sure it doesn't create problems. So it's for anybody who's interested in the history of computers, that's an interesting place to visit. Then there's the Space Telescope Science Institute, and of course, full of fascinating scientists. And went to visit my old friend Ray Ballard, who's actually the PR guy for Hubble. But I've known him for about 20 years. Ray has been brought to the Vancouver Centre on a few occasions, and I was once a happy member of the Vancouver Centre before I found greater happiness here. And but I got to know Ray back then, so I was happy to see him. He has been at the Institute since almost the beginning, so I will be hitting him up for some old war stories. Now we're going to talk a little bit about the future of Hubble. On this trip, I was thinking a bit about, what's coming up? And of course, the idea is that one day Hubble out, and it will be it will re-enter the Earth's atmosphere, hopefully in a controlled manner. They still have to work out details on that because it doesn't have any rockets going to be attached to it. And of course, some people think, well, that's terrible because we want Hubble back in the museum when it's done. Well, the fact of the matter is that a lot of it is already back on Earth because these instruments have been changed out. And these photographs here, I went to the National Air and Space Museum to visit some of my historical buddies there, but of course I had to go and look around. And these are two instruments which became famous in the first surfacing mission. The one at the left is the CoStar, the contact lenses that were put on board Hubble to deal with the spherical aberration. Now, what happened is that eventually all the instruments were just changed so that they could internally deal with the spherical aberration. So eventually there was no need for CoStar. So it was brought back to Earth. Now, CoStar looks like is about the size and dimensions of a booth. And this photograph kind of concentrates on one end, because in one corner of this phone booth, you have these very sophisticated pickoff mirrors that grabbed the light that came in to Hubble, and they were ground into these weird and wonderful shapes to make up for the spherical aberration. And then point to the off there is see that image. The next image, it looks like looks more like from the famous St. Valentine's Day Massacre cellar, rather than the Hubble Space Telescope. The Wide Field Planetary Camera 2, with Pit 2, which was put up on the first servicing mission, but it was replaced, I think, in the most recent servicing mission. So it was up in space for about 15 years or so. And this was the instrument that actually took a lot of the pretty pictures that we know of. So what are all those holes in it? Well, that's the radiator that was on the exterior of the telescope. And when it was brought back to Earth, they were interested to see, well, how many times it's been hit by micrometeorites or just space junk. So they drilled those out and took those for analysis. But anyway, these are two very important bits of Hubble that are back on Earth, and you can go and see anytime you like. Another thing I did was Jim Gelatin gave me a fabulous tour of Goddard, and we went to the gigantic clean room where they were assembling the James Webb Space Telescope, which is supposed to take over from Hubble in 2018. So it's kind of hard to see. You can see some of the all this lattice work here. You can see some of the parts of the James Webb Telescope, and they actually had one or two of the mirrors installed. It doesn't really. You can sort of see a hint of gold near the right side there. It doesn't show up too well on this screen. But fairly soon, I think JWST is going to be transported down to Houston, Texas, where they have a gigantic vacuum chamber at the Johnson Space Center for some testing. But anyway, head on it. One difference, JWST, of course, is quite a different thing from Hubble. It's Hubble is only up about 300 or 400 miles above the Earth. JWST is going 1 million miles away into one of the range points, so it can't be serviced. And unlike Hubble, Canada is actually in this program. So some of the work that's gone into that telescope was done right up here in the hill. So that's going to be exciting, but as I said, it's 4 years' time, and the hope is that Hubble will still be operating for at least a couple more years after JWST is launched, so that they can do some coordinated work and then as a result get more value out of the data from Hubble. And just to sort of wind things down a little bit, Jim was at this meeting, and he probably stood where you see me standing there. But in honor of the 25th anniversary of Hubble, there was a couple of, for want of a better term, the data dumps, and Hubble has taken thousands of images. I forget the exact number, and this is all coordinated at the University of Washington. But they took these all these images of Andromeda. You can see the core of the galaxy at the left there, and you can walk up to it and see individual stars. It's an amazing thing they've done. And they actually have crowdsourced some of the work on it, because you can see through the Andromeda galaxy, you can see other galaxies far more distant. And they kind of outsourced to citizen scientists some of the works of picking out these galaxies that you can see through Andromeda. And this is going to be a program that's going to be a great use to astronomers for years. You know, we have a problem because we exploring the Milky Way, because we're so deep inside it, even though we are in the suburbs, that it's difficult for us to sort of see our way around the Milky Way. And so, one is probably the best one to look at close up. So hence this particular program, and so this is all available on the internet. You can download it, but make sure you have a good broadband connection. And they created this little exhibit to sort of show it off. So it was fun to see that. And the other thing we got was they on Hubble, more powerful instruments, and they went back and looked at the Eagle and retook the famous Pillars of Creation photograph. They had much better detectors. They didn't have the small detector backplane shape we had. And they also shot that one. That's UV, isn't it? The UV version. Yeah, this infrared. So you can see it looks somewhat different there, and so those are amazing pictures. And the original Pillars of Creation photograph was taken in 1995. When they put these out, we did have a bit of a talk from some of the people who are working on this, that there's subtle changes between the two over the years. So So this was certainly a highlight of that meeting. Of course, the biggest highlight was Jim's talk about the work that we're doing at the center of the universe. And just to end off, this image came out this week, and this was not on the Hubble site. I found this on the ESA site, but of course it's spreading like wildfire all over the internet, and I believe some of this processing was actually done by amateurs, and these are a couple of birds of nature, and then in the background, you see some gravitational lensing, which created this. But the role in this photo was not the end. Part of the work I'll be doing in the book will be talking about Hubble's effect on popular culture. But I think I'll talk about that again and end it there with a delicious Jack in the Box sandwich. Thanks very much.
Well, thank you, Chris. Of course, as a small token of our gratitude, I have the ceremonial liquid container to offer you.
Thank you very much.
I don't think you had one of those previously. Oh, well, anyway. And we'll look forward to hearing from you in a year or two on how the project is going. Thanks. Okay.
All right, so that's pretty much the end of the talk tonight. Thanks for coming out. Thanks everybody at home for tuning in.
We're at 5 years.
5 years? Hey, it's not bad at all for our first run. So thanks for coming out. We'll see you again next month. Any questions for Chris, by the way?
Yes.
Yeah.
Just a second.
A couple of questions.
Yes.
The first is, you said that Hubble's doing a lot more than just taking pictures in the visible light. Is your book going to have all summarized what some of these other?
Oh yes, absolutely. Because I want to talk about each of the instruments, which had their own particular lives and made their own findings. I can't at this stage give you a coherent explanation of it. The other day, one of the people who's worked a lot on Hubble is from around here, of course, is John Hutchings, and he worked a lot on an instrument called the the Goddard High Resolution Spectrograph, and then there's been another one. I think that was replaced by Stitz.
You worked on
so there was those instruments, the spectroscopy, and a lot of the real bread and butter work was done there. That most of that stuff is probably more important than a lot of the pictures that were taken.
Okay, and the other question was, is it true that the James Webb telescope will not take pictures in visible light, but it's going to focus on the other frequencies?
It's it works mainly in the infrared. Although my understanding is that it does have some ability in sort of the optical wavelengths. But I actually haven't really talked to people about, well, what can we expect in the way of fancy pictures from
To answer that, it'll actually take pictures in visible light, but at redshift in visible light. Like it's a geared camera, right? So you're gonna get, I'm not sure what redshift frame, say redshift 2 galaxies will appear out of the thrust frame. So it will say at a certain redshift. It's not geared towards me.
Right.
Thanks.
How have you and your team members split up the work for this one?
Well, I'm sort of, I'm leading the research right now. And John and Arent are working on they're quite busy with questions around the archives. Like, we've been having discussions about what kind of software we're going to use to put it online. And you know, if I've learned anything in the last few years, certainly, and I also talk about things like being on the board of the RE National, is the amount of sweat that goes into making decisions around software. You know, I'm amazed at how much time and effort we have to put into thinking about the RASC website. And then, well, what sort of software is going to be most useful for an online archive that we can just hand the keys to NASA when we're finished, and then that they can put up and make available to researchers. And that question is more complicated. So a lot of the work that John and Arent have been doing and sweating out those issues. And you know, as you learned earlier on in my talk, I'm not all that adept with software.
Let me just make a comment, because you made many really absolutely spot-on observations. The issue of data archiving, the impact that's had on scientific research, particularly in astronomy, has been enormous. One extremely symbiotic and effective relationship was developed between the observatory and NASA when we started the Canadian Space, what we originally called the Canadian Space Astronomy Data Center, and we very quickly realized it should just be the Canadian Astronomy Data Center. And it turned out when Hubble was launched, everybody at Goddard and the Space Telescope Science Institute were incredibly busy trying to figure out how to operate this very complex instrument. And the very small staff we developed at the observatory had the time to think about how to make the user interface powerful. And they were very, very successful. And many of the things that people now take for granted, data archives were developed on the Hill. And it's a fascinating story. And there was an article, I think it was in the National Post earlier this week, an article in a Canadian newspaper looking, and the basic point of the article was that Canada is really lagging behind in the storage and making accessible large data bases. The one Canada gave was the data center in Victoria Hills. My heart but I have a quick question. In Kessler's book, does she interview J.N. English at the University of Manitoba?
I think I may have. Oh, she worked in the States before, right?
Yeah, J.N. is a trained artist who then and she worked for a number of years on creating the way Hubble presents those images. Again, one of your key points is
that's right.
How the Hubble team changed the way you perceive.
That's right. Yeah, no, that's
and J.N. played a key role. And you know, you could use the RASC travel fund and invite her to come out and give a talk, because she gives a wonderful talk on the way the eye works and colors and art and how they came up with the power. And so you can invite her out and you can interview her when she's out here talking.
Yeah. You had a question.
But so, we weren't here years ago. I don't know what base there is, but is the Hubble Space Telescope essentially like a repurposed spy telescope? Because I've heard with spy telescopes that are very similar. And I don't know, maybe like 10 years ago, I heard that the problem with the mirror was just because it was basically that they lifted one of the spy telescopes that is focused on the Earth and pointed it to deep space, which is a different focal, obviously.
Well, that's
I don't know.
that's a very interesting question. Which is, I'm not going to be delving into it that much because that part of it has already been done. But I do have to talk about it in connection with the sphere collaboration issue. Hubble the spacecraft was Lockheed, and they were the ones who made the spy satellites. But I think I don't think you could just flip Hubble over and have it look at the Earth. I don't think it was that simple. So I suspect there was a lot of systems that it had in common with those satellites, but there was differences. It did play into the sphere collaboration issue because one of the things that led to that problem was that there was not enough testing done on the mirror while it was on the ground. And one of the reasons for that was because the security folks were not happy having too many people snooping around the plant where Hubble was being made. And so they reduced, there was a test done on the mirror that would have been done. It's kind of a completely free and open situation. So, is that?
So they're, well, I just heard that their spy telescopes obviously the top secret, right?
Yeah.
And the spy telescopes was essentially very similar to Hubble. Not saying that Hubble is just a spy telescope, but like you said, much of the technology was taken directly from pre-government invented, right? It's the same thing it was used, it's how it was working, right?
Yeah.
So that's maybe I don't know.
Complex story. It's not simple.
That's right.
The U.S. military industrial complex is highly secret.
But we don't know what's that. I'm sure they would be painted silver.
And Kodak had a whole set of mirrors. Kodak was going to.
Yeah, that's the sort of previous generation of spy satellites have only recently been, they've only recently sort of made public what those were. And those are the ones where they use film and return them. They have little capsules on them that we drop off every few weeks and brought the generation was the Coronas. I'm not sure even if I live to be a cranky old age, or whether I'll live to see when they actually take the wraps off of the spy satellites, which were rated as HST. Yes.
Do you think the Hubble's going to come down in a manner be available to be seen as a whole,
No.
a whole piece, or is it pretty?
No.
Okay.
You know, it's a lot of money. Like, you know, Hubble. It's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. On the last servicing mission, they installed a couple of fixtures on Hubble so that a vehicle could dock with it to the rocket, and then slow down at the appropriate moment so that it's specific instead of say over our heads right here, or you know, in Duluth or something like that. But As far as I know, there's been no work to develop that vehicle that would go up and do that. But one day Hubble was going to conk out, but they've always had problems with the gyroscopes. So probably those will go. Actually, there's been a lot of work done to prolong the life of Hubble. And one of them is that they figured out how to run it on only one gyroscope.
Wow.
They've already sort of got that figured out.
So they're running on one now and two.
They have, I think they have, if my memory serves me right, first. And I know one of them has some issues, but they do try and run it on fewer, like they keep at least one in reserve. But if they get down to two, they'll probably just run it so that in reserve, so that they don't unnecessarily burn out. But when they all go, I know what will happen after that. We could be in a situation like what we had Skylab in 1979. Where Skylab actually came. Yes.
Why would they not just use the docking robot rocket?
Well, this
and
is
push it into a safe orbit.
This is what I'm talking.
As opposed to crashing it, put it into a safe orbit, maybe.
Accelerate it, get it out.
That's actually a good question. I heard about directing it. There's this general issue of orbital debris, and maybe it's just thought that we have not that big, going around because there's at those altitudes there's already a lot of traffic, so that may be the thinking. Yes.
Will you have an opportunity to give information on how lessons learned from Hubble might have defined the James Webb Telescope?
I hope so.
Well, that could be part of your focus, not there.
I hope so. Yeah, I think I have to talk about what led to the James Webb Telescope and why they did it the way, why they're doing it so differently from Hubble. I think I have to talk about that. There's all sorts of other things. Like another thing that I didn't mention, after Hubble on the International Space Station, when they started doing those servicing missions, they found out that they had to do a heck of a lot more preparation for them to do the repair than they had anticipated. And the fact that they did that on Hubble about 4 or 5 years before the ISS started to fly was a great benefit to the ISS. So there's that as well. Anything else?
So don't forget that the Astronomy Lounge should be open for us on the top floor in the Elliott Building. And the counselors down here for a quick meeting. Thanks, everybody.